Take Review, a film podcast with one eye always on the Oscar race. I'm your host, Jen Sobchak Bankard, and I'm here with two trickster demons that terrorize this podcast. First, he's that thing from your dream. P.T. McNiff, P.T. McNiff, P.T. McNiff.
I'm trying to capture the perfect primal scream. I'm going to blow it up, mount it on the wall, and I invite all of you to do the same. Hello, Jen. It's showtime.
Nice choice. That's not the character I would have thought you would go with, but I like it. And we believed he was gone forever until we found a questionable flyer in the attic. Greg Cass.
Never seen that chick before in my life or afterlife. Hi, Jen. That was my best Beetlejuice. That's all I have in me. I'm done. That's it.
We'll take it.
Just to be clear, it's just a touch Sling Blade, but it's mostly Beetlejuice.
I'm not gonna be able to unhear that now. That's terrible. You've ruined the whole show. So, listeners, those were all references to the film we are here to review today, Beetlejuice, which is in theaters now. It's been 36 years since Tim Burton made the original Beetlejuice in 1988, and I'd say that many viewers were willing to wait. People are basically not missing a beat with this legacy sequel. Did really well at the box office, making $111 million domestically, which apparently really made Matt Bellany on The Town sad because the line he set for like betting on the box office performance was 112 million. And he fell just short. So if you're listening to us for the first time, we will have a spoiler-free section designed for those who haven't made it out to the theaters yet. And then with a very clear alert, we will shift into spoiler mode for the rest of the show. PT, if listeners think we're not nightmare fuel after listening to this episode, what can they do?
After you finish cutting holes in your mother's $300 sheets, if you'd like to listen to the podcast, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We're hosted on Jen's Substack at thelongtake.substack.com, but you can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, YouTube, and more. You can also find us on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review, and on Letterboxd, you can follow our account at LTRPod, or you can search the hashtag LTRPod and look at each of our individual reviews. Jen?
Thanks, PT. So let's just get into it. We'll start with the short take. What was your general reaction to Beetlejuice?
Mine was pleasantly surprised. I don't think this is necessarily a good movie for reasons we can get into. Like, I don't know if it's like constructed as a successful cinematic experience, but as a continuation of this old movie, my main concern was a sort of do no harm to my memories of the original. And I don't think it did that. I think there were a lot of what I would think are obvious mistakes and bad choices that are nevertheless frequently chosen in these kind of movies that this movie avoided, which was good. And I had a bunch of fun with it, despite, again, all the little nitpicks and flaws, and maybe, not little, but major flaws that are in it. But I think it was a reasonably fun time, though I think we can discuss that may also tie into the fact that I have long liked the original. That's been a part of my movie life since it came out. Greg, what did you think?
So I had the craziest experience going to see this movie, where I went to like a full-blown like party in the theater with more costumes than honestly I think I've ever seen at a single screening before, all Star Wars, Marvel movies included. And just like a wild ruckus crowd that, was into every joke in the whole movie. And I could not believe that I was seeing the same thing these people were, because I was not there. I was not like so high on this movie that like everything amazed me and, oh my God, look at that funny thing. And look at that. Like, I did not have a bad time, but it was just the whole experience I recommend. So my kind of short take is get out and see this in the theater because it's wild. And I don't think I anticipated how much people love Beetlejuice. And we can talk more as we go on about why maybe I'm on the outside of that crowd. But I did not have a bad time watching this movie, but I especially had a good time watching people watch this movie and get so into it and enjoy it. So, Jen, what about you?
So I also really enjoyed the original Beetlejuice. And I do feel like my theory as to why this is doing so well at the box office is that 36 years is somehow a sweet spot time to pass for prime nostalgia for not only Beetlejuice, but like Tim Burton. Because like peak Tim Burton arguably is like 90s, right? When I would have been an impressionable child growing up, right? And I think for a lot of people, it's like Beetlejuice was a movie that they watched over and over again. I would say it wasn't a movie I've rewatched a ton, I guess, especially recently, but it was really great to revisit it and kind of get excited for this movie. So I would say that in general, I had a lot of fun. I feel like it captures the vibes enough that I was invested regardless. You know what I mean? Like it got me to the point where I was having fun and I was like, yes, we're back in this world enough that it's not like 100% recreating vibes from the original movie, but it's enough that I'm like, I'm in. But the movie critic hat that after when I put that on, I'm like, this movie is a mess structurally. It has so much going on in it. There's like 5 different plots that all hastily come together at the end. So it's definitely a flawed movie, but I would say it is a successful Beetlejuice sequel, if that makes sense. And I actually saw this in 40X.
Hey,
this is my second 40. Yeah, this is my second 40X. Well, because for 2 reasons. One is like I had seen it in Twisters, had a pretty good time. I wanted another data point, and I managed to convince a bunch of my friends to go with me, and they were pumped for Beetlejuice. They were like, "We love Beetlejuice. We're so nostalgic for it." One of my friends in particular is like her little goth kid heart fluttered right at the thought of seeing this movie. So I convinced them. I was like, it would also be really fun if we did 40X, and they were like, what's that? And then I had to explain it to them. And then and I will say that it was not as worthwhile in terms of enhancing my experience with the movie as it was for Twisters, just by virtue of the content and sort of what was happening 40X wise. The main thing that was added that I didn't have in Twisters was the smell. So there were pine trees. Every time they were doing like idyllic New England shots, there was like a pine tree smell. And I'm pretty sure there was like a formaldehyde smell.
Wow.
Or some weird chemically smell that only came up when we visited the afterlife or when Beetlejuice showed up. And so I was like, clearly this is on purpose. And clearly this is meant to evoke death in some way. And I couldn't quite pinpoint. Like, not like I frequently smell formaldehyde on a regular basis. So it's like I couldn't really say for sure what it was supposed to be. But that's what I felt like it was.
Hold on, Jen. I just got a communication from our longtime listeners in the future, and they want to know, water on for this one or water off? What'd you do?
So
yeah, where were you on fluids?
So I would say water on, because the water, I don't know if I can spoil this. So, I mean, if you've seen a Beetlejuice movie, there's some blood, there's some fluids, right? So the splatter factor was definitely enhanced. There were a lot of people in my theater being like, ew, when they got splashed at the right time during the movie. So yeah, I would say water on. I definitely, a couple of people I was with turned the water off. And they were like, we don't think that added to the experience. We're glad we did it once, but we don't think we're going to do that again. That concludes my bonus content for my short take, the 40X updates.
Well, if we're going into theatrical experiences, I would like to add, and this would also augment your theory about the 36 years as the correct nostalgia length, that I saw it, of course, at my beloved Alamo here in downtown LA, and got there like 5 or 6 minutes before the like official stuff of like, welcome to the theater, here's our video store, what here are previews for movies. So it was the end of the Beetlejuice specific pre-show stuff. And if you had asked me before I walked in there, how much did you engage with the world of Beetlejuice outside of the original movie, I would have been like, I don't know, I was aware of it, but like not that much. but the end of the pre-show roll was like 3 Beetlejuice toy commercials from the early 90s and the opening of the cartoon show from like 89 or 90. And I knew every beat of of each of those things, of the commercials. I knew everything that happened in the opening of that cartoon, which I remembered not liking and thinking wasn't very good. But apparently I watched that opening maybe every week, or at least like let it run from whatever came before. So that was fun. That was a fun little like reminder of like, you actually really like this more than you thought. Like, hopefully you can go enjoy this new movie. So that was good. And it also was a reminder that there is, and we can get into it more maybe later, that it feels a little bit weird, sort of like in that Top Gun vein of like, there's a movie, long pause, here's a second movie after talking about it a long time. But there was this cartoon series that I think really get into people's brains. There was the musical, and there also in that pre-show role was a breakdown of the Universal Studios like live stage show with Beetlejuice, of which there have been like 4 or 5 iterations of it. And so I think that this character has lingered in ways that, like, just looking at the movie filmography doesn't reflect. So something to talk about, something to get into later. And thank you, Alamo, for reminding me of all these things.
I will just shout out to get a little more specific, because you guys got to get more specific. I
went into 40X because you started talking about people wearing costumes and being excited at the theater. So that's
where
I took my cue from.
I wanted to just talk through. There were like 3 or 4 screen accurate Beetlejuices of surprisingly great quality. I don't know if it helps that we're near Halloween, so they were just pre-gaming. There were then the 2 kind of monstrous appearances of Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis, done
Very
in
nice.
like very great detail. But my favorite by far is the guy who clearly just used to work at Foot Locker and wore his old striped shirt and just called it cosplay. He was my favorite. Amen to that guy. We've all tried to reuse our work uniforms before, but really, again, I want to be clear. I'm not making fun of these people. It was wild to like see this passion and this excitement. And Jen, you alluded to the beating goth emo heart within so many grown adults that was reawakened and loved this character, and it was really fun to be a part of.
Yeah, I think there was an interview with Winona Ryder doing the press tour for this. I think it was probably at the premiere, and she said something like, Tim Burton has been so important to me because he not only made me feel like it was okay to be like a weird girl, but he actually celebrates being a weird girl, and that how that was important for her when she was that age, and is probably, she was kind of extrapolating that to like and so many other people. So I do think that there is a power to Tim Burton's aesthetic and sensibilities in that sense, and that makes it so popular, and probably would make it so that, like you're saying, so many people who are adults now really think back fondly on the role that it played in their childhood, right? So since we're already kind of getting there, let's do the recommendation algorithm in which we establish the audience of a film. So we acknowledge that not every film is for everyone. Do you have to be these people we're describing, these nostalgic fans of Beetlejuice, to enjoy this movie, do you think? How dependent, if we're on, we have lots of data points of sequels, prequels, franchise content, right? Like, where does this rank in terms of how tied to the franchise it is?
I will just say I think you got to care about the original. I don't think this will stand on its own. And in my non-scientific polling of my students, I had about 60 undergrads today, and I was like, "Oh, did anybody see Beetlejuice over the weekend?" And they all looked at me like I was crazy. Like, why would we have gone to see that? And so I suspect that it is very much aimed towards older than that. But I do not want to diminish Jenna Ortega's star power, because she's propping up like a third of Hollywood at this point. So I do, I kind of wonder that. I asked the question before class began just because I was really curious, and there wasn't a lot yet. But college students don't often rush out opening weekend. If they hear that it did really well, they're probably likely to go a little closer to Halloween up there. So I would recommend this if you liked the original one. If you've seen the original one and it's fun for you, I would go for it. I can't really think of a lot of comps other than the original. I, in my bizarre obsessions in movie watching, happened to watch the movie Death Becomes Her like the afternoon before this. And I was like, oh, these are actually kind of similar, and they have kind of a similar set of ideas. I also am already predicting that Death Becomes Her should be the double feature billing with The Substance when that comes out. But we'll get there. We'll get there in
Ooh.
festival season next
Nice.
week, the week after. But anyway, I would say if you like that kind of a little bit dark, a little kind of black comedy, I think this might speak to you.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't know if you can jump into this and be like, I'm excited about it if you aren't excited about the original. Although I could see people who are younger than we are, who maybe got into Wednesday on Netflix, which is obviously Jenna Ortega, and show ran and directed, at least a few of the episodes were directed by Tim Burton. So I could see someone who was into that having that as their entrance into this, because that's feasible. And there's all these references that maybe you just assume are deep lore, and you don't necessarily need to have seen an old movie to have dug into it. But yeah, I do think that the box office is powered by the nostalgia of it and the people who are into it. I do sort of feel like, and I say this with love, as noted earlier, love for Beetlejuice. I think that there's people who are weird that are like, well, this was a window into allowing myself to be weird. I also kind of think Beetlejuice is like weird for normies. Like there's people who are very straight-laced and normal who are like, you know, it's a movie I like, even though it's totally weird. Beetlejuice. And like, they think that that's like some cred. And so there's people who like skewed into like really bonkers and out there stuff. And there's folks that are right in the mainstream lane, but this is on the edge of that. And I think both of those groups can feel happy about this, although I kind of feel like there may be some people that this feels too weird to them. But I would say the big sort of recommendation group would be folks who are worried this is just going to try to hit the nostalgia beats over and over. We talked last week around Alien Romulus about the Force Awakens effect. I have separately the Ghostbusters Afterlife effect, which is just like, oh no, like you try to create all this whole new story and characters, but you center it all about how in awe they are of what happened in the original movie and how serious and important it is that they are recognizing the lore they are seeing and unearthing and experiencing. And that's not what this is like. Like this does have vibes. It's really tied into that first movie. I could see people not latching onto it if they don't care about the first movie, but it isn't like in awe of what happened before. It has a very similar kind of mood and vibe, and I would say even to some degree structure as the first movie, but you know, in ways that feel like it's trying to exist on its own. Although I don't know how well it succeeds, it's not because it's overburdened by nostalgia for the most part.
I feel like Greg's pitch would have gone down very differently if he hadn't led with Beetlejuice, but instead had not only said, have you seen the Jenna Ortega movie that came out this, but also, have you seen the Joyce Byers from Stranger Things and the Moira Rose from Schitt's Creek? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's so interesting that the core cast of this movie, you know, especially the folks who were in the original, right? Jenna Ortega obviously wasn't in the original, but they have had such long careers since then, because it's been 36 years, that more people now would probably recognize Catherine O'Hara as a character from Schitt's Creek more than from the original Beetlejuice movie. And so I feel like if I were trying to pitch this to someone who had no idea what Beetlejuice was, that's probably the angle that I would take, to be like, look, all these actors that are in fun things that you like, just go see them in this movie. They're also doing fun things that you might like.
You are reminding me of how many TikToks there were. I think it was last Christmas. It might have been the Christmas before, of people realizing that Catherine O'Hara is the mom in Home Alone is in Schitt's Creek, and they were like, "What?
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is insane!" And it is so funny because the rest of us, I mean, maybe this is just what it is to be middle aged. We're like, yes, those are facts. Like, it's been very obvious to the rest of us, but it becomes a revelation. And you know, I think if those kids, and I'm gonna say kids even though that's a little rude probably, if they popped the original Beetlejuice on HBO Max, I believe the place it's streaming right now, they would probably have that same reaction, like, oh my god, she's back here and she's funny in this too. And it's like, yes, that is somebody who's been funny for 40 years and we've all enjoyed her. But I think your point is exactly right. There were a lot of funny jokes popping around threads of Winona Ryder needs to stop losing children in weird zones, because that seems to be her mode. But we'll save the rest of that thought for spoilers, I suppose.
The other thing I want to note before we move on to spoiler mode is that the writers are from Wednesday.
Mm.
I don't know if you were aware of that. So it's like, that's the other way to pitch it, is like, I think, yeah, for the young kids, the youths. Right? Insert Steve Buscemi meme here, right?
Is it and speaking of that Steve Buscemi meme from 30 Rock, don't forget, if kids put on the original Beetlejuice, they'll see Jack Donaghy back when he was thin and handsome.
Yeah.
And never had been on trial for anything. But I forget what I was going to say. I was going to say something else, but I'm over it. Sorry,
right.
Jen.
Let's go to spoiler mode. So if you have not seen Beetlejuice, and you do not want it spoiled for you, please go see it. Everyone else is apparently, and come back and rejoin us for the rest of the conversation. Okay, so I want to get a feel for how successful do you think this was at kind of taking us back to the original. In my short take, I mentioned that I thought it did it well enough, but not 100%. Where is everybody else on this? Do you feel like, because I've heard so many people being like, use the phrase "return to form" for Tim Burton, and I'm not like quite all the way there. But what do you think?
To me, the return to form is less about how well this ties in the original movie and how tactile and, like using actual real world, like practical effects and building these crazy sets, which when it feels like, and I have not seen every one of Tim Burton's post Alice in Wonderland movies, including Alice in Wonderland Forward. I don't think I've seen any of them, but like, all the commercials and everything, clips I've seen of them, it all feels very CGI. Like, there's a lot of costumes in it, but it's just, gone in this different direction. And this does feel like a return to, they built all these afterlife sets. They built all these weird sort of surreal landscapes. For the most part, there's some things that look like green screen, but that's what I thought like people responded to, and that's what people liked. And that's what, when people think about, I love Tim Burton and his aesthetic, they mean that sort of, I'm going to push it to the late 80s, because I think Pee-wee, Beetlejuice, and Batman need to be in his peak. But also through the mid to late 90s, that's all a part of it. And so I feel like that was there. I mean, it never felt like I was as happy as I was watching the original movie, in that regard. But it felt like, yeah, this is doing a good job of following up on those vibes without leaning too much into the same things over and over again. There were enough new variations on all the fantastical parts for me. I don't know.
This is a bad question for me. So one of the things I just need to put on the table, because we haven't done it yet. So usually these episodes begin with us saying, like, what's your relationship with this franchise? I need to say I did not see the original Beetlejuice until 2 years ago. So I was a ripe 39 when I saw the original Beetlejuice. When I saw that movie, it unlocked for me that I had, PT, you kind of stole my thunder, I had seen the cartoon, and I had a pretty good working knowledge of the cartoon. And I think exactly like you said, PT, it was not a cartoon I tuned into, but if I left it on Saturday morning, whatever was before it kind of rolled. And so I only slowly realized how much of that cartoon I had knowledge of when I saw the sandworms. I'm like, oh, I remember the sandworms. So my primary relationship to the Beetlejuice franchise was actually a Burger King kids meal toy that I received based on the animated movie. And it was like a 2-sided toy. One side was Beetlejuice standing, the other side was a stack of 4 heads. And this was just like one of our generic bathtub toys for like, I want to say a decade. I don't think I took baths that long after Beetlejuice the animated series came out, but we'll psychoanalyze me later. So like I just had no connection to like this franchise whatsoever. So that is also me, and we're in the safe space of spoiler zone. So I will say I don't think I'm a good Tim Burton fan either. PT, cover your ears. If you asked me my favorite Tim Burton movie, and this is where I get kicked off the podcast, I would say Big Fish, because I loved Big Fish when it came out, and I always loved Big Fish, and that was like my first like real taste of him, and it's not the like undiluted hard Tim Burton. It's the kind of softer around the edges, nostalgic Tim Burton. So all those movies you just list, even Batman, I didn't see till I was, fairly recently compared to these things. So for me, all that stuff, it's like I don't know what to reference it. And like lacking other things, I think, what is Tim Burton going back to form on? White people. But we'll get into that issue later. So I think to me what stood out is this was a movie very committed to the practical, as PT said. I noted Neil Scanlon's name in the credits, who's a major creature shop artist for Star Wars productions and came up through the Henson system, I guess we'll call it. So I can see that all at work, and I can really admire that. And, for example, the father of the family who's in the afterlife, he's got these little piranhas all over him that are waggling. And there's no part of you at all that's like, those are real fish biting that guy. But you can still sit there and kind of lean into like, this is very funny to make this actor give this heartfelt dialogue while you clearly have little mechanical gizmos wiggling all over his body the whole time. And like, they don't stop. And so like, I'm reading The Return to Form as there's a school of film fan that has been bemoaning CG for a really long time. And this felt like, you know what? Let's just give Tim Burton a ton of money and let him do his thing very practically and give these people what they want. And if that's the like experiment, I think the experiment works. And there is still an audience that can say, I know those aren't real fish, but I love the gag so much I don't care they're not real fish. How did it land with you, Jen? And where are you in Tim Burton zone?
So yeah, I generally am a pretty big Tim Burton fan. I'm not like a Tim Burton completionist. I haven't seen all of the movies, especially the more recent ones. But Nightmare Before Christmas, which I know is not directly directed by Tim Burton, but is clearly ripping off his entire aesthetic and is has his name. It's pitched as Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas, right? And that is really what has sustained as like a staple movie that I think of when I think of Tim Burton's sort of like gothic vision, right? And I think Sean Fennessy on The Big Picture was saying that Tim Burton was the first director to make auteur theory make sense to him. The idea of like, oh, it is so obvious that he has like a singular vision that is consistently executed upon in all of his movies, that he has these particular things that he's interested in, and he has a way of showing the world and a look and kind of the art, like an artistic design that is all his own, right? And I feel like this movie mostly did that. I think the reason I'm not giving it a 100% endorsement from that sense is because I actually thought that the world seemed too much like our own. And now I gotta go. Oh, there's the toy. Sorry, Greg just sent us a link to the toy. Oh yeah, I remember that. That was just hanging out in your bathtub while you were a kid. That's great.
Forever.
Maybe I could put this link in the show notes so people can see if they have no idea what we're talking about. But yeah, the yellow hair. That's a choice. Okay.
Well, that's what the animated show was. He had yellow hair.
So I forgot.
It was all there, yeah.
But anyway, so actually I thought the sort of the town and the house and the places that we go in this movie that aren't the afterlife seem too realistic. Didn't seem Tim Burton-y enough. Because I think if you go back to the original Beetlejuice, one of the things that's so amazing about that movie is that it shows suburbia and like the sort of upper middle class as ghoulish as and scary as the afterlife, right? In some ways maybe scarier, because there's all that like satire about the Catherine O'Hara's character, right? Delia, right? It is like trying to redo the house so it's like this modernist aesthetic, and not, there's like a weird tension between the quaintness of the original version and then she's trying to modernize it, and there's something really sort of like ghoulish about that, right? And so yeah, I feel like that part was missing to me. It just sort of felt like we were in our world and then we were in the afterlife, and that was fantastical, as opposed to the whole world and the whole movie feeling immersive and like we were going somewhere else. But other than that, I feel like all of the all the things that I love about the original are here, right? Like for me, seeing all the people in the afterlife in a way that like where they are essentially wearing their deaths, right, in a very explicit and visible way. It's very Haunted Mansion. Like if you've been on the Haunted Mansion ride in any of the Disney parks, and like it scrolls down to reveal, right, it looks like a regular portrait, and then it scrolls down to reveal how like what sinister thing is about to befall them, right? And I feel like that's one of the things I really enjoy about the original and thought was hilarious here. So I feel like there were certain things like that they really nailed, and I was like, yes, this is right. But then other parts of it kind of took me out of it, like and actually felt a little bit more like, I don't know, like I was gonna say like Wednesday, but that also does sort of, because Wednesday is sort of like Jenna Ortega is weird and everyone else is kind of more normal, right? And so that this movie felt a little bit like that. Like there were certain weird characters and everyone else is more normal, right?
I think what's missing in the elements, like I don't necessarily think of Beetlejuice in the same way that, say, Edward Scissorhands is a critique of suburban life. Like there is the sort of feeling of, well, the suburban life is a little suffocating and boring especially when you see it through the eyes of Winona Ryder and Catherine O'Hara. But I think it's like the critique is more of Catherine O'Hara's like, I'm going to be the like urban artistic type who comes in and blows up this house. And so that sort of real world weirdness mixing in, which to the point where that, like, I mean, that's a little beat in the original movie when Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis come out from the afterlife and think they're in another weird part of it, but then realize they're in the dining room of their house because she's made it all, they've been gone so long, she's been able to overhaul it. So that element was missing. You only get one or two little glimpses of, I think it's that dining room. And otherwise the house looks very normal. It almost looks like it's reverted back to where it was before. Maybe Charles Dietz won all those battles when Delia went back to New York to do art displays. But but I do think that is something that's missing. To clean up a couple things, one, Greg, Big Fish, I think is the only good 21st century Tim Burton movie until maybe this one. So I have full marks for that. Although I do contend that's like 85% an okay movie, and then the last 15% is a masterpiece, which makes everything like quite good overall. But an incredible ending to that. And I looked it up. It was the Ghostbusters cartoon that led into Beetlejuice. So I don't know if you watched the Ghostbusters cartoon, but I certainly did. And I think that's like that would explain why even when I didn't really want to watch it, I was just kind of rolling over into like, yeah, I like this movie too. And this is also about a ghost. So I guess I'll let it run for a little while and I would watch a bit of it. And I think that the sort of wrestling with how do we go back to this in a legacy sequel in Ghostbusters is the most similar to Beetlejuice, not just because, unlike Greg, who didn't see this till he was 39, I saw this the weekend it came out because it was advertised in the paper in 1988 as like the funniest movie about ghosts since Ghostbusters. And I was like, well, then I have to be there. Which it was funny because the main thing I remember about going to see it for the first time was going to see it with my friend and me excitedly telling his dad that we were going to go see this movie and it was the funniest ghost comedy since Ghostbusters. And he in a rare display of being beleaguered with his son and his son's friends, said, well, how many comedies about ghosts have there been since Ghostbusters? And I was like, I don't, what? And I got like, that was the first like abrasive bit of film criticism I think I ever heard, directed towards me personally.
You drank the marketing Kool-Aid.
I did. I was 10.
Sorry, I'm Googling when Ghost Dad came out, which we're not allowed to like because of the Bill Cosby of it all, but that was a key ghost-related comedy from my youth.
True.
1990, so it hadn't come out yet. So you're
yes,
good.
we also are not allowed to like it because it wasn't good, because I did watch Ghost Dad as well, and it wasn't very good. And that's the other problem with Tim Burton in the last 20 years, isn't just the CGI. It's that these movies have not been good. Like, and I say that having only seen some of them, but everyone I haven't seen, people have just described as them being bad. So, you know, it's practical, but I think it's also, even if this movie is pretty good with some big flaws, is a big step up from Dumbo and Miss Peregrine and all these other Dark Shadows. Like these movies that folks are like, what, who's asking for this?
Well, I just want to jump in, and I really like the 2 points you both made related to, you know, what's missing in this movie, perhaps. And I would only reframe that, and this is me speaking purely as a country boy from New England. I would say it's urban versus rural, not urban versus suburban. And I think that's important, not just so I can put my nose up in the air, but also to say, like, there is that kind of bumpkin feel. And I thought the first movie had a nice tension where the beauty of rural life is doing, like, having they don't call it this, but a staycation where you put up wallpaper in your beautiful house and you make it breathe its like historic airs and kind of fit into that world. But the downside then is what we experience with Winona Ryder's character, which is like, yeah, it's terrible if you don't have your people there. And I do think so much of the comedy in that first one that I enjoyed derives from how insane Catherine O'Hara is. The joke, I forget exactly which order. She's like, oh, it's probably Cantonese. They don't have Szechuan. And like at the time, I think that movie came out, it was like, look at these idiots who like know about Chinese food. Whereas when I'm watching it in 2022, I'm like, yes, that might be a concern. So like, I do think like that flavor is missing here. The closest we get is Iron Man 2 screenwriter Justin Theroux, who seems to be playing like a caricature of an urbanite. But the slow reveals, and this gets back to Jen's point that maybe there's too much in this movie, the slow reveals that he is acting this way as a trick make it very complicated to figure out what the film is trying to say about that. Like, I thought the original was very clear. There's this weird tension, and it's fun to look at the gap in between those two sides and kind of play with the caricatures of both sides. Whereas this is like, yeah, this guy's an idiot, and oops, he's just pretending to be an idiot. And whether you like him or not doesn't really matter. And I don't really have anything to say about a man in touch with his feelings as a modern human. And all this is also to say, like, it's also the context of 2024. Like, rural versus urban has a much different valence now that is kind of coded into our society as like, who are the real Americans and what have you. And I think that's all, you know, it's all, you know, the words I can't say. But it is kind of hard to enjoy the simplistic story of this with that kind of extra societal framing kind of sitting around it.
I think he's still an idiot, but just an idiot who's greedy and sinister, right? I don't think, to me, it wasn't like, oh, suddenly his face changed and he was like, I've been pretending the whole time. It just, I feel like his motivations kind of came out. And there's also weirdly, so yeah, you're making me think there are attempts in here to update the social commentary to 2024, because there's the TikToker, please give us some privacy, they get sucked into their phones bit, right? That's clearly some kind of commentary on social media and how shallow influencers are or something like that, right? And then there's also the like a weird kind of like anti-therapizing of our culture, right? Because the Justin Theroux character it ends up being exploitative in the end, but the whole time he's kind of like he's positioned as like, oh, he constantly wants to get in touch with everybody's feelings, and isn't that gross, right? And so I don't know, but yeah, so I think the attempt is there, and you could trace that back to what the original one is doing a little bit, but at the same, because there's also selling out, right? Because Lydia has grown up and she's not cool, edgy goth girl anymore, right? She's kind of like a fraud. Like she has a TV show where she's taking advantage of people, like ghost hunting and stuff. So yeah, maybe it's just that it's not as clear what the commentary actually is, whereas it's so clear in the first movie.
I'm not sure she's a fraud, but I think she is trying to capitalize off of her ability to see ghosts, and maybe he does it fraudulently. I did think. Well, we'll get to potential. I have a potential thesis. Like, we'll go to that segment when the time comes. I do think it's something about the movie is more about how do we fit in and carry forward off of the original, as opposed to trying to make a statement in and of itself or on its own. And so that's, I don't know if that's an inherent problem with sequels, but it's an inherent problem with legacy sequels. But I think it's fair that to say that, that's something that's missing. I also want to bring up, in terms of things that are missing, the main characters from the original movie, which it's easy to forget that they are the main characters, but in fact they are. So I guess one of my questions for the two of you, given different histories of it, was, were you okay with the sort of one line, they found a loophole, they're gone, about the Maitlands?
I mean, they kind of deserve better. So here's the thing. I wasn't expecting them to be in this movie, because I was like, how could Alec Baldwin pick himself back up from what has happened to him and be in a Beetlejuice movie? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And then I believe that there's an interview floating around with Gina Davis where she's like on the red carpet for some other thing, and they ask her, why, like, did you want to be in Beetlejuice? And she was like, well, I'm a ghost in that movie, and ghosts don't age, so I don't think that's gonna work. And like, it sounds like nobody asked her, and she didn't reach out. Like there was no conversation about it necessarily, but she's kind of like, why would I be in another Beetlejuice movie? My character's not supposed to age, so I don't want to do that. Like, and yeah, she doesn't want to be de-aged, which I don't blame her. So I wasn't expecting them to be there, but I do feel like just having one throwaway line that refers to a very vague loophole seems like a little bit of a cop-out. I don't know. But there's so much else happening in this movie. I don't think I want like 5 minutes. Like, you know what I mean? There's not 5 to 10 minutes that we can spare in this movie to explain what happened to them.
Well, and I think you just sketched out the options. De-aging would have been terrible and much more distracting if it had been there. I think I'm the only one on the call who already got the surprise Gina Davis this summer when I went to a different movie that she is in, and she was very good in. So I've had some Gina Davis recently, so I was sated. But it is, because I know issues of gender in Hollywood are so important to her, and she's worked really hard to diversify sets and give opportunities to women directors, I do just want to say, like, she is, to me, the poster figure of, like, Hollywood did her wrong. Like, you watch something like League of Their Own, and you're like, Gina Davis is incredible. And then she just hit that age where Hollywood forgot about her for, like, 20 years. And it sucks, because she should have had, like, 10 more hit movies, after that time. And I think, should be around more. And so in that regard, it's a little disappointing, even though I would not have wanted a de-aging effect. The hard part is, to PT's question, like, if there is this loophole and Lydia knows about it, isn't there ways to undo all these other problems with that? Like, I think it points to the fact that this movie wants to have the Deadpool and Wolverine fun of, like, don't worry about it, right? I always think of the second Austin Powers movie where the character turns to the screen when Austin Powers is asking complicated time travel questions, and the character's like, you shouldn't worry about it, Austin, and turns to the camera and says, and neither should you. And I get it. Like, that's like a really fun way to just kind of laugh off and, like, don't ask hard questions. These aren't movies worthy of that. But I don't think this one threads that needle, because so much of the mythology is on these complicated bylaws of the afterlife and, bureaucracy.
That's a major plot point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
Right?
all of that is so fun and integral to the core of this property. It just feels like it rings hollow, and I think it made me literally sitting in my theater seats go, oh, okay, they couldn't get them or they couldn't find a way in. I think the screenwriters have said they had a draft at some point that had their cameo and they just couldn't make it work. What did you
Well,
think,
and
PT, since you asked the question?
I think ultimately Jen's point is right. I've seen, I was sort of looking around on this, and I've seen some immediate headcanon stuff out there that was like, oh, if there's a loophole, it must have been that they were left behind as ghosts, because not everyone is probably left behind as ghosts. And they're left behind as ghosts because they have unfinished business. And the events of the first movie and what is presumed at the end of it, where they help raise Lydia and make her more comfortable in her surroundings and her life. Once she comes of age, they're, because they were trying to have kids in the first, this low-key infertility, like subtle theme of the original, that they're waiting to like raise a child, and they do that, and once they're done with that, they're able to move forward. But that also only would have been like one or two more sentences like That's in true. The movie, so there wouldn't even need to be like a 3-minute monologue. It might have just been, oh, once I turned 18 they left, and that, if that is the answer, that could have been it. I think that, Greg, what you were saying at the end there is the crucial part, that there was a draft at one point that did this movie, and I will say this and recognize that only Greg's eldest child will think of this as a compliment. Everyone else will think of it as a slam. This kind of reminded me of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull a little bit, where it was like, oh, there are like 3 or 4 different versions of Beetlejuice 2 that were written along the way. And I know they started writing it in like the early 90s. Kevin Smith talked about being offered Beetlejuice 2 to write it when he just became famous after Mallrats. So like they have been working on it off and on for a long time. And this did sort of feel like Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. They were like, well, what are the parts about all of these we like? And they just kind of stitched them all together. And presumably use staples like Tim Burton had his girlfriend do, and be like, chunk, 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 let's put them all together. This is the movie as it exists. And that somewhere in there was an example, but it got shaved out. Like a lot of the other things that sort of get put out into play and then either fade away for 45 minutes and then come back, or are just kind of only occasionally referenced. And that's where I think, going back to where both Jen and I were like, if we look at this as a piece of cinema attempting to be a motion picture worth, analyzing and dissecting, a lot of problems. There's a lot of inherent flaws in this. And then it kind of comes back to the Basil exposition of it, which is just like, well, why don't you not think about it? My big one of the why don't you not think about it is in the first movie, and I'm so sorry to be the guy who's like, well, Beetlejuice lore had established. But in the first movie, you sort of like start to pick up on the fact that everyone in the like working in the afterlife zone has harmed themselves in some way. There's a lady who slit her wrists. Juno, the caseworker, has her throat cut open. There's the guy who's landed in front of a truck. There's people hanging from nooses. And Otho says like, oh, did you hear the people who commit suicide in real life, their punishment is to be a civil servant in the afterlife. Ha ha ha. And that's like mentioned as a joke at the dinner table, but you see that it's actually true. But then in this movie, the dad that they've been missing, who like was gone in the Amazon, who has the fish all over him, is working one of those civil servant jobs. So it's like, is it supposed to be that he killed himself? Because I was like, once they revealed that, I was like, oh man, he's going to have to tell them why he killed himself when his daughter loves him so much, and he's estranged from his wife. Like, is that going to be a thing? Like, I think he's going to have to talk about that, but it's never mentioned. It's never really brought up. It's just the sort of funny thing of him being like, I've been keeping my eye on you, and the fish are flapping, and that's all great. But if you start to like think about it too much, then it's like, well, when has that changed? Is it just we can't make fun of people who committed suicide anymore, which is probably a good idea, just in a meta sense. But it's just interesting, all these little bits that the movie seems to like really connect with the original pretty well. But once you start really thinking about a lot of different parts of it, it's like, this is sort of falling apart both on its own and in connection to the original. So you kind of have to just switch your brain off and be like, I liked when they all started lip syncing, or I liked when we saw new weird rooms in the afterlife. That's all I wanted to see. And as doing that, it was really fun. But thinking about it, maybe starts to fall apart.
A couple things. One is I feel like I mean, I agree with you. And once you point that out, the only thing I can think of is maybe because he's part of like the passport control, that somehow is a different department and is staffed differently than
The other fan theory I saw is that you are sentenced to work as a civil servant, but not every civil servant is someone sentenced to do that.
I see.
Some people
Right.
might choose because they're being giving and generous and they're willing to do the work because there's so many things to process, but it's all headcanon. It's similar to
I think the
Maitlands.
bigger problem for this movie with that character specifically is that it feels, from a character arc kind of emotional perspective for Lydia, it feels very unfinished, because I kept waiting for her to have a conversation with him where we find out like what went wrong long before he died, right? Like, and what, like, but instead it's not like they don't speak to each other, but it is very quick and very not satisfying, I feel like.
And
so,
why, I just want to add in why they can't see, she can't see him, right? He just acknowledges, like, I know you can't see me, but they don't explain why that is, right? It felt like a gap.
Right.
Sorry to interrupt.
I kept expecting there to be an emotional reason for that. Like, she is so heartbroken that he's dead that she refuses to see him or something. Or like, you know what I mean? Or that it's something about her being in denial about something about their relationship. Like, I was expecting some kind of explanation, because that is what is so delightful about the afterlife, is as a world, right? It is so well built out with all these rules and regulations and bureaucracy and paperwork and that. And so to have something be kind of like incomplete and open like that seems weird.
My assumption had been he was alive. Like, that's what I thought the twist was going to be, is he had not actually died. And that's why she never saw him. But it's just, and they're there. So to bring it all back around, the lack of the Maitlands just sort of feels like another thing that is like, we don't have time. Like, we kept this movie under 2 hours. It's a solid hour 40. We don't really have time to like dig into that too much. And beyond the fact that their story was done, like I'm in a way, I'm glad they didn't shoehorn them in for like, 10 minutes of no reason. But to have a weird sort of CGI recreation of them being young, or some sort of like hologram message of them from, they're on a ghost vacation in the afterlife somewhere. Like, we probably didn't need that. And I was glad they at least acknowledged them, but it was also almost humorous that they just sort of throw that off. Not as humorous as how they dealt with Charles Dietz, but that's a separate thing. We could talk about as much or as little as we want.
That is a good counterpoint, because I feel like that was very clever and well thought out. Because they kind of figured,
that actor passed? I just wanted to make sure my impression was there.
Wait, do you not know, Greg?
Yeah, no. This is going to be tough.
Oh no.
Let's just say his most recent problems with the law is not correctly registering on the sex offender list that he's supposed to be on, because of his first problems with the law.
Just go to his Wikipedia page.
Okay.
All will be revealed.
Okay. All right.
Wait,
apologies for not knowing.
No, it's fine. It's fine. And like, a lot of people probably don't know, because the people I saw the movie with didn't know, and like I had to be. They were like, huh, that's weird that they never really showed it. Like, he wasn't in the movie, but the character was still in the movie. I'm like, well, okay, like, here's why. Because
don't think about the fact that he was on the entire series of Deadwood as well as the Deadwood movie after that initial arrest, because he's very good in Deadwood, and he is a very good character actor, but he also has some evil trickster demons inside him that lead to him doing some bad things. And so it's good. It's probably better for him to not be in movies, and hopefully the likeness they used was derived enough from promotional materials of the first movie, so he won't actually get any money for this one.
I was wondering about that, because I'm like, you are using his likeness technically, because the hilarious crystal shark fin headstone, right, has his face chiseled on it, which is so good. It took me it wasn't until they showed it the second time that I figured out that it was a shark fin, and then I was like delighted. Like, this is so funny. But I thought that they assessed that correctly from a legacy sequel perspective, because people get really mad when you just don't explain where a character is from the other movie, right? Or like just sweep them under the rug and don't incorporate them into the story at all, because you can't have the actor. And so I feel like him getting eaten by a shark and then therefore we can technically show him, but we don't have to use the actor because you don't see his face because his top half has been bitten off by a shark. It was just like, I was like, I love this. And I kind of figured out that like that's, I mean, the animated sequence where they're explaining the flashback of his death, I was like, well, this feels a little weird, but also fitting with Tim Burton because it's like stop motion animation, right? So I was like, okay, but it really was when they showed the shark, the results of him being eaten by a shark, that I was like, this is genius, and they were so clever to do this. But yeah, where do we go from here? I mean, I kind of want to talk more about like how we would edit down this movie, but we're not quite there yet.
Let me jump in with another plotline we've barely touched upon, if I may. There was a Bond girl in this movie, Monica Bellucci, and I have no idea why. I mean, the initial sequence where she assembles herself is awesome, and it's really creative, and it's really cool, and all the effects of that. The way she soul sucks, and we get this kind of practical effect, also very cool. And then that plot just goes nowhere. It is so baffling to me. And I'm not a major Monica Bellucci. Bellucci. I didn't want to make her a Belushi brother. Bellucci. I'm not a major fan of hers. I remember her from The Matrix. I remember her from the Bond movie. But like at the same time, she's a world-renowned actress who just is given nothing in this. So that
Greg.
is my plot line to question about. What happened there?
All right, this is strike number 2.
While Jen explains this, I'm going to think about Monica Bellucci as a Blues Brother, like with latter day Jim Belushi and latter day Dan Aykroyd.
Let's get that sequel going. Like
Blues Brothers 3000.
So Greg, Monica Bellucci is currently, I assume, in a relationship with Tim Burton. So this is like a Helena Bonham Carter Muse situation. Yeah. Which actually PT did mention in passing earlier, but you probably didn't catch it because you didn't know.
I did.
I thought he meant Beetlejuice's girlfriend, because it was Beetlejuice's wife. So that's what I thought you were referring to. But
no.
So
okay. So that's practically speaking, that's why this is in here. And probably was not allowed to be cut. But for me, the thing that really dawned on me that blew my mind, and it was actually today as I was putting together our outline, they're essentially stuffing a prequel into a sequel. Because I can see a whole other prequel movie just about Dolores and Beetlejuice and have like the Dietz family is not even involved, right? We just have Beetlejuice working the grind in the afterlife. And then, then Willem Dafoe's character probably has more to do, right? If we just focus it on that, and and then it's basically a monster movie or revenge, like basically like Kill Bill, but in the Beetlejuice world, right? Where she's coming to get him, and then we slowly, right? She gets closer and closer, and then there's a final confrontation. That makes a lot of sense to me as its own movie. I have no idea what it's doing in this movie, because she just kind of like goes away at the end, right? Like she doesn't even really factor in to the final scenes. She
shows up and then is wiped. Yeah, it's just sort of immediately wiped away. It doesn't, the Astrid, Jenna Ortega's character Astrid, and the boy that she starts like a relationship with, that is given more time to develop. And it is sort of funny that just like quickly results. Basically, Beetlejuice shows up and is like, "You're not going to be in the rest of this movie," and is just like goodbye and like sends him to hell. Like that was great, that was funny. But then they do the same thing kind of again when this other like lurking threat. Oh, when she showed up, I was like, okay, been a little bit weird that she hasn't been around for most of this. But I guess this will be the last like 15 or 20 minutes of the movie will be reconciling this, and then it's all dealt with in like 90 seconds. And it's just like, oh no, we're done with this too.
And we don't even, I think the biggest crime probably is we don't even learn anything about Beetlejuice as a result of the storyline, which in theory is what we should do, right? Like if this were to work in this version of the movie, I feel like there had to have been some payoff in terms of like her revealing like something core to Beetlejuice's character that then influenced like his dynamic with the Dietz family, or like, you know what I mean? Like but no, it's just that she's mad at him and is chasing him, and then she's gone. Like, I don't. The thing is, I really really liked the sort of parody of old Italian horror films, which I think are called like giallo films, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like that I thought was great, and I was like, give me a whole movie of just this. Like, I love this, but then it didn't mean anything. So
I thought she was going to get loose in the town, and that would be really fun. And instead, Bob and his other coworkers that
Other
are all
Bobs?
named after producers of the movie, I'm pretty sure, including Brad Pitt, which we haven't unpacked that yet, but I have some questions. But they get loose in the town, and that's like funny. Like, look, they're buying beer, and then like that goes nowhere either. And it's like, you know, I thought a little bit about Hocus Pocus, that there's a part of Hocus Pocus where like the town of Salem goes chaotic, and like there's a lot of fun little vignettes of what it means to have ghosts and ghoulies around. And please don't think I'm endorsing the movie Hocus Pocus. But then
that would be fine, Greg. As long as it's not Hocus Pocus 2, we're good.
I was gonna say, especially not Hocus Pocus 2. But then like all of that just disappears, and I honestly walked out during the credits because I was like, whatever this party is, I've overstayed my welcome. I was like, I imagine if there is a post-credit scene, it's just like those guys like drinking beers in the woods or something, like to show that they're out and about. But like again, I mean, I think PT diagnosed all this earlier with his astute comparison to Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. These to me all feel like remnants of previous scripts, and they designed sequences that they really
Sorry, I fell asleep at the wheel area. I just realized I didn't even think to do it.
I was like, does only Greg get the music when he brings up Indiana
I guess
Jones? So. All right, new rules.
But it does feel like they designed sequences and they were like, well, we have to keep that. That is so cool. Doesn't really matter that they don't really go anywhere. And that to me is the bummer, and why I think this will get worse every rewatch. Whereas honestly, I do think the original Beetlejuice gets better on subsequent rewatches as you recognize the intricacies.
Yeah, I will, because I was wondering when I left, and I was starting to like begin that unpacking of like, a lot of this doesn't really make sense, or like doesn't fully come together narratively. And again, like that doesn't, if we were doing the Siskel and Ebert, I would still give it a thumbs up, but it wouldn't be like a rousing one. I would be like, but no, it's a fun movie. But you know, it doesn't really make sense. And I was like, well, maybe it's because the first one is like similarly chaotic and kind of all over the place, but I just don't know it because I've seen it so many times. But then reading through the Wikipedia plot summary, I'm like, no, this holds together. Like there is a clear central story. Like the only reason it sort of feels that way is because if you don't watch it for a while, it's easy to forget Beetlejuice is only in it for like a dozen minutes. Like he just only sort of shows up. And so you kind of think like, oh, and then there's this like chaos agent that shows up, but like he's always there in the service of the Maitlands and the Dietzes and their conflict and what's happening between this couple and this family that took over their house. Whereas in this movie, yeah, it's like 10 different things all sort of just mushed together from different story ideas. And I got one more cue for the music drop, if I'm allowed to trigger the Raiders March. And one overwhelming thought I had in thinking about this movie was it almost feels like if for the Indiana Jones franchise, they made Raiders of the Lost Ark and then they made Dial of Destiny. And that's it.
Magic. I mean, the sound drop is called Greg of Destiny on my soundboard.
But yeah, so basically it was like we had this movie, and then we have to assume there were all these other things happened to all these characters, but we come back and it's like, well, we're still sort of dealing with some of these central issues that were lingering in the last one, and all this time's gone by, and blah blah blah. Like, how have things changed, and who's grown older, et cetera, and like how. The thing, like the idea, like Jen, you were saying, of what if there was a movie that was just, what is Beetlejuice's story from when he died? Like, what happened then? What happened in the last moments he was alive, or the first days that he was a ghost and a demon? That could have been one of the Beetlejuice movies in the interim. Was there like an Alec Baldwin, Gina Davis wrap up their story movie along the way. Like there could be 3 or 4 sequels in between this one and the first one in another reality where they kept making those movies. And I don't think the cartoon or the musical are considered to be official in any way. And I don't think that really fills the gap narratively. Maybe it did for the fandom. And it's, again, weird to think of there being like a Beetlejuice fandom, but I know they exist because I went to the Beetlejuice subreddit and I saw that there are a ton of people who've been posting there for like decades about this movie and the things around it. So I'm aware it's there, but I think that it led to them being like, we don't know if we're ever going to get everyone together again. Let's just put all of the ideas we have into this and yet somehow still end on a teaser like there's going to be a third movie, which was an interesting choice for the final, like, I don't know, 20 seconds of this movie.
So I think because we keep talking about how this movie lacks focus, I want us to try to figure out what the focus should be. Like if we drilled this movie down to its core, like what is it actually about? And so thanks to Colby of the Colby Cast, an excellent podcast, I'm kickstarting a new segment that we really have been doing. We just haven't been calling it this, called Thesis, Please.
Thesis, please.
And that is from Andor. It was surprisingly easy to find that as a soundbite on the internet. So other people clearly have had this idea
everywhere. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, yes. So yeah, Thesis, please. And so let's try to figure out, revise this movie so it's more focused and more streamlined in its story. Like what should it actually be about? Like what to you either was the most compelling part, or what do you see kind of lurking inside this movie that has a lot going on? Like what is the central thesis? Like what is it trying to say?
To me, the thing that it had, which I thought was interesting and would be what I would recommend they tease out, is this sort of toxic masculine manipulation in male-female relationships. And it was obviously Justin Theroux and Lydia. You can tell who I cared about as a character by whether I know the character name versus the actor's name. And then the Ghost Boy and Astrid. And I don't even know the actor's name for the Ghost Boy. So it's just a description of it. And then obviously Beetlejuice and, I mean, everyone. But Beetlejuice and like the world around him. And
I mean, Beetlejuice and Monica Bellucci, I guess?
Well, no. Well, so what I would say is, like, if we're fixing it, I mean, it's really Beetlejuice and Lydia. The attempt is with Lydia. Mm-hmm. What I would say is, all due respect to Monica Bellucci and what I hope is a happy relationship with Tim Burton, a man who, of course, seems like nothing but joy and light in the world, then you can you take that part out, save it for a potential prequel movie. Maybe you can't get everyone back, but I bet you can get Michael Keaton back, even though he said he won't do it again. But he's a lot of talk about not revisiting these late 80s touchstones in his career. So take that part out. Unfortunately, that probably means taking out Willem Dafoe, who I thought was incredible in his small role in this. But
he really fine.
Was. Take that out and have it. Yeah, have it just be about this sort of passing of the torch. I really liked when Delia was talking to Lydia about how it's like, yeah, like, I'm sorry that your daughter is being a jerk to you. It's like when you were being a jerk to me. Like, you used to be the person who like didn't want to talk to her mom. Like, that was you. So now you're dealing with that. And I think that could have been interesting. And if it was maybe developed a little bit more, it wouldn't have fallen into, as fan of the show Hasib posted on Jen's Letterboxd review, like Winona Ryder kind of just falling into Stranger Things mom mode instead of being Lydia as an adult. So I think that's like, that could have been developed more. And then I think that ghost boyfriend would have had more impact because it would have been both the mom and the daughter sort of having this manipulation. And then Beetlejuice could have been talking to both of them and like being the obviously toxic force around. And you still could have had all this ghost stuff and it still could have been going off finding stuff. And maybe there could have been time for Lydia's ex-husband, her late husband, maybe I should say, and what happened with him. Like, that could have been explored. You know, it wasn't so much time with Monica Bellucci, but I think it's enough. That's probably like 15 minutes of the movie is around that, and the the investigation and Willem Dafoe and blah blah blah, and that all felt like to get more Beetlejuice in. And I think I think they had a good amount of him. They didn't overdo Beetlejuice, but I think that making it about the relationships, the interpersonal relationships, romantic relationships, would have been the way to pull it together.
I like what you just said a lot, and I want to emphasize, like, a kind of brilliant thing about the first one is Beetlejuice is not in it all that much, and that was very surprising to me as the 39-year-old watching this cult classic that everybody loves for Michael Keaton. And it's like, oh, like, he doesn't show up for a long time and is certainly not the emotional core. And I know I'm dodging the question just slightly to say that I was worried that the brand of Beetlejuice would move him more centrally. And I think it did move in that direction, but not totally to the point that this was detrimental. And I think other franchises have made that mistake. I like that in answering the question of what is this film's thesis, PT did the teacherly thing of like, well, your thesis should be this, but you have to trim out this other stuff, which is just a move every writing teacher makes from time to time. So trying to do the same thing, which is to look at the core of what this project seems to be interested in. I think this film is interested in the gap between identity and performance, and thinking about the ways in which we perform a self for others that is inherently false. And I think I can start to piece that through a lot of these plot lines. Again, I'm going to jump between actors and character names. Catherine O'Hara, not Kathleen, Catherine O'Hara, she is pure performance and actually dies doing performance, right? Like she goes to do the performance of her grief and turns it into a production and seems to entirely dodge the actual grief she is likely feeling, right? And so her real identity is, totally covered up by the performance. Justin Theroux, same thing. He's performing something that he thinks is of value, but is not himself. And I think that is also the story of Lydia Dietz, just to guarantee my promise that I'm jumping between, in that she has turned her life from the end of Beetlejuice 1, which is, I'm going to embrace this fact I see ghosts and create a family from these two sets of parents, to I'm going to perform my gift on television as kind of an Elvira figure, kind of a Ghost Hunters figure, and that performance is going to mask kind of who she really is. And I think when we meet her, she's really lost because of that gap. The very brief influencers fit this message too, because they get punished for performing instead of experiencing something authentic. And I think the gap between Beetlejuice, the small business manager, I guess, I don't know, the role he's trying to play and act as manager over all these shrunken head creatures, versus maybe his wife speaks a little bit more to who he actually is and what he has done in his past. And he's stuck in that gap too. I haven't really mentioned Astrid in that. I think she's the one I find a little bit harder to fit into that. She's got that great kind of, actually, I thought of Winona Ryder in the scene where she tells the girls, like, when you're, divorced and dating your Pilates instructor or whatever, like, there's that great, authentic, like, pure Gen X spirit to her, which is like who she really is, and she has to kind of perform her age in other ways and her role in the family. So I think this film is interested in those questions and in that gap, even if it hasn't quite figured out what it wants to say about that. Because for all I just listed and ranted about, it's not like we get a lot of moments where we actually experience an authentic version of any of these characters. Maybe the family meeting in the afterlife is them finally breaking through all that, maybe, but there's not a lot of that. So I think it needed a little oomph in that area. What'd you think, Jen?
I really like both of those, and more than probably what I'm about to say. But I think for me, this story is at its most compelling emotionally when it's dealing with the conflict between Lydia Dietz and her daughter Astrid. And so the version of this movie that I would kind of pivot it to and refocus on is as an intergenerational story, because partly because this is a legacy sequel, right? So inevitably we have to deal with, oh, there's the next generation. And I'm hesitant to propose this because like I don't want it to go so far in the other direction that it becomes like some of the problems we've seen with other legacy sequels, where it becomes more about, oh hey, we're bringing back these characters and then there's not enough space to do a new story with new characters. But I do feel like for me personally watching this, I was the most compelled by the idea that Lydia Dietz would have a daughter who is staunchly against believing in ghosts and is like, my mom is a fraud and is a hack. And earlier when I said fraud, I didn't mean like she couldn't see ghosts. I just meant like she's like, maybe I meant sellout, like she's like gone commercial and is trying to profit off of her abilities, and really clearly pandering to what
anti-Gen
people...
X too, right?
Yes.
Like that's the greatest sin of a Gen Xer. Yes, go ahead.
Right. And in theory, she becomes the very thing that she does not want. And in the first movie, her parents, when they find out, oh, we have ghosts in the house, great, we can make a ton of money off this. Like, they immediately start scheming about it. So it's really interesting that they have her, when she grows up, actually become the very thing that she hated about her parents, right? And so I feel like it's the like, we don't want to become our own parents, but we can't help it, kind of like that sort of intergenerational conflict that to me was the most interesting thing about the movie. Because, and then by that logic, the main thing I would have to keep is the fake out with the ghost boyfriend, which I'm going to say, granted, I am pretty gullible, but I thought I was being so smart because I was like, oh, his parents are ghosts. Like the second they show them and don't show their faces, I'm like, oh, his parents are ghosts. This is going to be great. And then I was like, wait, he's a ghost. Like, totally didn't see that coming. So good job, movie, for putting one over on me. But I think I would keep that plot line because I think the invocation of Beetlejuice makes the most sense as an act of desperation, right? Because that moment where Lydia is like, like, I really want to save my daughter. I don't know where else to go. Beetlejuice, 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 right? Like, so that's kind of the version of the movie that I really would wanted to makes a lot more sense to me. So I think that probably means upping the Jenna Ortega screen time even more. But I also am a huge fan of Wednesday, so like that's not a problem for me at all. Like, I really like her. I think, and then her character, like Greg was saying, just needs just like 10% more to be kind of better defined, I think. Because she's like really into goth stuff and Halloween. Like she's Marie Curie, right? So she's clearly Lydia's daughter, but at the same time, she's like doesn't believe in ghosts. So like, what's the deal with that kind of?
Well, it's interesting how she presents it as, I'm into all this gothy Halloween stuff because of my dad. Even though we're all like, but that means that's Lydia. Like that's what Lydia was doing.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, it would be interesting if there was more of a distinction between who she is now, or that there's more of a contrast between who Lydia was then and who Lydia is as an adult and a mom, where it's sort of like, oh, you don't even know that like your mom was in a black mourning veil for the opening of the last movie because she had to move out of the city into the country.
Right. And I think there was a big missed opportunity here for the quote unquote old Lydia to return, because it did feel like it was pivoting towards Astrid reconnecting with Lydia because they realize they're more in common than they think. And like she realizes, oh, my mom's not just full of crap. Like she can see ghosts. She was cool. Right. And even Delia says to her, you do whatever it takes to find that little goth, like, you know what I mean? That little, I don't remember what she says. You find the goth girl that you used to be. Right.
Yeah.
And because so she is saying like you the person you are right now is not the real you, right? Sort of what Greg was saying, like she's gotten so far afield from what's authentic to her. But that moment of her actually finding her true self never comes. Like she never gets back into like, I'm a cool edgy goth girl mode. Like she still stays wide-eyed for the rest of the movie. Which I think doesn't really work.
Right, which in theory could make sense because she can't be that person because she had the Maitland. She had Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis.
That's true.
Helping her, and she grew and she matured and she was still a little like gothy and hung out with ghosts, but like tried in school and blah, 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 like as we see at the end of the last movie. So, but then that would require spending more time wrestling with those characters, which either the movie didn't have time for or didn't want to spend time on. So I think, that would be another. I think you're right. Like, I think what I was thinking, what you're thinking, I think we're all sort of in a similar ballpark of like focus in on that dynamic, like the dynamic between the mother and the daughter of Lydia and Astrid, and make it be Winona Ryder and Jenna Ortega as the two main sort of characters of this, and explore that.
I also just don't want to lose sight of PT's point that there is a good kind of feminist core to this. The fact that this is built around not just 3 generations, but they're women, and maybe that's circumstantial you had to get rid of the father figure. But there is an undercurrent of kind of women supporting women, and when we're all saying we wanted Lydia to get to like some kind of more authentic connection, I just want to be clear. Like, I think it totally worked that marriage meant nothing to her for all these. She's like, I mean, she was like, yeah, I'll marry you. Yeah, I'll marry you. Like, whatever. It doesn't mean anything. And I think these edits we're suggesting to make that core, I think that is what the movie wants to say, is like the real authentic women supporting women, because that's the kind of triad of these 3 women is pretty cool. And while, I don't know that we needed 68-year-old Tim Burton to give us that kind of women supporting women is pretty neat message. I do think it's notable that that's what the core of this franchise ended up kind of being about, even though the draw is probably Michael Keaton still.
So I'm the one who has the kind of like factoid layer that we can add to this. It won't be as long as what PT had on our last episode,
Right.
because it's not quite as rich as that or storied. But the
Or
thing
unedited.
The what?
I said or unedited,
Oh.
under curated.
So okay, the song that Beetlejuice possesses them all in the church. It was not a song that I immediately recognized, but it is called MacArthur Park, and it was originally performed by Richard Harris, who you may know as Dumbledore.
Mm-hmm.
So that blew my mind. I was like, Dumbledore could sing? This is incredible. And then I looked up a video. It was like, I went down a whole rabbit hole with this. But what's interesting is that the MacArthur Park song, originally recorded by Richard Harris, was then later covered by many artists, but most famously Donna Summer. And so, which I think I can't remember exactly what order they appear in, but I think both versions are in the movie. And what to me, why that seems significant to mention in the context of the conversation we're having about what is the movie really about, I feel like that is what really reinforced that at its core, this is a movie about multiple generations of women, like Greg was saying, because it's sort of like the remixing of, and the like, you know what I mean? Like that we could be still singing the same song, but in a completely different style, and that's okay. And like, I feel like there's a certain thread of that. And that I've heard a lot of praise from critics about Jenna Ortega's character, that she's not just Lydia 2.0, that she is her own character. Right? She's not just like a mini Lydia from the original movie. And she's not just Wednesday, right? Like, so I think that's what, to me, that was really interesting to think about, that like maybe by using those 2 versions of the song that are very, very different and represent very different points of view, right? Like Richard Harris and Donna Summer, I can't think of maybe like a stronger contrast between two people who could be singing a song. So, for what it's worth, I feel like that to me thematically kind of unlocked it a little bit. Also, the Soul Train was hilarious because I love a good pun.
I mean, Tim Burton coming back hard against the accusation he has no diversity in his movie, with both Black people dancing in afros and also a Chinese dry cleaner. Just really, really, really being like, no, I'm woke.
Yeah. NPR's Pop Culture Happy Hour, those folks also complained about these things. And they were like, really? It's 2024?
I liked critic David Chen posted the character from The Matrix, I believe it's Switch, who just says, not like this. Like when, we wished for Tim Burton to be more diverse, but not like this. Yeah. Hey, this is probably fodder to be edited out, but I want to say I actually did know MacArthur Park for a really weird reason, which is I went to a Colson Whitehead book talk, And he, for some reason, he gives very fun book talks, and this is relevant to the Nickel Boys discussion we'll have later this year because he's the author behind that. But this particular, he turns them into performance art, and this one he just started reading the book and then was like, I recently heard the song MacArthur Park, and then just recited all of MacArthur Park, and I was like, what is this? Like, what's happening? And the other, then when I saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it features in that film because Robert Goulet performs it on a TV in Brad Pitt's trailer at the drive-in, I think is
Mm-hmm.
and so that to me was like, wait, is that the song Colson Whitehead recited to me one time? And so when it became such a focal point in this movie, it is a very weird pick, but I was again like, wait, why is this song like such a like weird skeleton key into these very disparate pieces of my life? So that's my history with the song. I did like the sequence, I'll just add. It was pretty fun.
It was fun.
Yeah, I thought so too.
I got excited when Greg was saying he had a thing because I thought we were going to the same one, which is that Weird Al parodied it in the early 90s, but as Jurassic Park. And he made it just about the plot of Jurassic Park, and it's incredible. And then I had to go and look up the song, but like you couldn't like stream it. I just had to like try to like find some way to like get it. And I like was looking at it. It's like it's about a cake, and it's in a park in Los Angeles. Like this doesn't make any sense. Shout out Langer's Deli, right off MacArthur Park. But yeah, it's a very strange song, apparently about a doomed relationship, which also makes it relevant for a wedding scene in a Beetlejuice movie, even if the doomed relationships that are included in the triangulation in the movie we got include one that I think we all agree we would cut if we could cut anything, the Monica Bellucci ex-wife element, only because it's not developed enough. It has to be its own story separately. But I also like that. At first I was like, this seems weird. And for some reason I totally forgot about the Deo thing from the original movie until like the second minute of them doing it. I was like, oh, I get it. It's like Deo, even though that was what Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis did. Like the Maitlands did the Deo. It wasn't Beetlejuice, but I'm like, well, I guess ghosts can just make people sing if they don't want to.
I do like the children's choir making that, like, that one experience was so central to his life and his joy that we will have a children's choir perform
I know, that was funny.
from the one dinner party he had. Yeah.
I'm glad because when the trailer came out, I remember people were like, there's a slow, like they did the slow trailer music, but of Deo. And I remember the discussion. I forget if we had it at all on mic, but I remember participating in discussions of like, maybe that's a joke. Like maybe in the actual movie, it'll be done with a humorous intention of, isn't it weird? There's a children's choir singing Deo at Jeffrey Jones's funeral. And it was, and that's great. I'm glad they made that choice. Because yeah, all that it says about his life in the intervening 35 years since the original. That's a happy memory. It's a core memory for him.
My only critique of that church dance sequence, because I was delighted by it overall, was that there's a moment where Jenna Ortega starts dancing, and I was like, yes, let's go, but it's so short. And I really was like having really enjoyed the Wednesday dance, which then became a TikTok sensation, partially with an assist by Lady Gaga. I don't know if you two remember this, but I was like, oh, that's right. She's really great at dancing and has like a really unique way of dancing. Let's do it. And then it was over. So that was my only critique, was like more Jenna Ortega dancing would have been great, because she does like a head flip thing that reminds me so much of the Wednesday dance. That I got really
Spoken
excited.
like somebody who needs to go to Home Depot and get the life-size Wednesday robot that will do the dance in your yard all this Halloween season.
What?
I'm pretty sure I saw on the internet that exists. It's the new giant skeleton. Existed. So, hey, you lost your Jabba. This is what you need now. I'll track it down.
We got a new Jabba.
Okay.
much scouring of eBay. We've got Jabba 2.0.
That's great to hear. It's not so great to hear there's a life-size Jenna Ortega replica available. I don't know if I like that idea. I feel like it needs to. I hope it's at least it's like done in a way that it looks like a cartoon and not like a young actress. I don't like the likeness possibilities of just people buying moving Jenna Ortega statues. I don't trust people. Is all I'm saying.
Okay, so I don't know. I other than agreeing with that, let's protect Jenna Ortega. I like her a lot. Apparently, she's really everyone on the set was saying that she's the biggest cinephile, and she has some kind of like letterboxed thing. Like I don't know, like her letterbox 4, which I'm not gonna be able to remember off the top of my head, was really impressive. Like she has good taste. So.
And it was amazing because she destroyed Catherine O'Hara and literally turned to Catherine O'Hara and was like, "You didn't read the notes. Like they told us to prepare for this." So it was very, very funny junket behavior. So really wonderful.
I love it. So before we go to Oscars watch, I want to hear from both of you. What is kind of your favorite element from this movie, or just something that's something we haven't talked about yet that really made you happy?
Overall MVP, I think unsurprisingly, it's Catherine O'Hara. I think she's MVP of the first movie. She's MVP of the second movie. But one thing that I had never noticed in the original, and I'm glad I did in my viewing of it a couple days before the new one came out, weirdly ties into a totally different Catherine O'Hara movie, unrelated to Beetlejuice. But have either of you ever seen Waiting for Guffman? Which is a Christopher Guest movie. Okay, Christopher Guest movie about community theater actors. Yeah, Greg, you need to see this movie. This movie's incredible. But a mockumentary, like improv. Mostly done by improv and then reassembled. And it's these people from a small town who are theater actors, and Catherine O'Hara and Fred Willard are the married couple that are like the stars of the local theater scene. And there's one point in the movie when she's talking about like acting exercises that she tries to do. And she says, I'm trying to do this new technique where when you're talking to someone, when you look at them, like you keep your eyes closed, and then when you look away, you open them. But when you talk to them, you close your eyes. And then like she does it a couple times. And it's very funny. In the original Beetlejuice, she never looks at Winona Ryder when she's talking. She closes her eyes when she looks at her and like does that. And it's like, it was a few years before. I don't know if it was like already a joke, if it's an in-joke in Waiting for Guffman that she's referencing it, if it's just a thing Catherine O'Hara thinks is funny, if it's something she actually does as an acting technique, but it's a thing that she does. And in this movie, like it felt very pointed that in the scene when she says like, where's that little goth girl? She like looks at Winona Ryder and is like, her eyes are open and is looking at her. But when she talks to Jenna Ortega, she closes her eyes when she looks at her.
Whoa.
So it's like something about like that interacting with someone of that age who's that much younger, like brings Delia back to like, I have to act like this weird stepmom who doesn't want to actually engage with this person who's frustrated by them. So that was my Catherine O'Hara in general, I thought was great, carried like huge parts of the movie and was consistently funny. But that was my little moment of just sort of like interesting through line of the character. And I don't know what it means necessarily. Like a lot of things in Beetlejuice. I don't know if it means anything, but I thought it was really cool and fun to look at.
The way her character evolved made so much sense to me. Like I wouldn't have guessed, but I really liked that the movie decided to take her laughable attempts at being a sculpture artist in the first movie and make her actually successful in this movie, right? Like she's figured something out along the way and became an actual artist, as opposed to like someone who calls herself an artist but isn't really one, right? And then I also like how she's the one who's like says the things that no one else will say and kind of like calls everybody out on their BS. It's like so delightful to watch. Again, I feel like Moira Rose really influenced her performance here, or just the evolution of her career has led up to her being able to give this performance in a way that's really nice. I'm gonna do my shout out. I really like Bob in this movie. He was adorable. And like I enjoyed him in the first movie, but I didn't really understand the lengths to which I would become attached to Bob in this movie. And every time they showed him, I'm just like, oh, poor Bob. Like he's just trying to do his job and everyone's beating up on him. And then when they showed that he dies at the end and it shows like R.I.P. Bob, I got so mad. I was like, justice for Bob. He did not do anything, and like everyone was expecting him to talk, and his mouth is sewn shut. Also, like, why does Dolores like untangle his mouth, the stitching, and then he doesn't say anything? Like, that seemed weird. But I really I thought he was really cute, and I was sad that he's gone. Like him huddling under the desk, so good.
Really good that they were practical too. Like, I just love that they looked like Muppets, right? They looked like guys in suits with kind of a crazy thing going on. I thought that.
Oh, it's true.
Really
He
well.
does have. Yeah, he does have
Sweetums.
like No, I was gonna say Beaker.
Oh, Beaker. Yeah. Oh,
He's got Beaker.
yeah.
He's got Beaker energy. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry,
I guess that
Sweetum's
makes
body, but
Beetlejuice-
Beaker energy.
I guess that makes
Sweetums on the
Beetlejuice
streets.
Bunsen.
A beaker in the sheets.
Wow.
Oh, you take that back.
And you went that way. Hey, I talked about this a few times on previous episodes, but it seems silly not to talk about this here. MVP, Melrose, Massachusetts, the town I live in, where I
Yay.
actually went on set for this movie, not in any kind of invited way, but because I am a looky-loo. And so, as previous listeners to previous episodes may know, the night that the holiday, the actors' strike became active, I got the tip that there were multiple blocks decorated for Halloween. And now in hindsight, I can see that these were the scenes where Winona Ryder was driving Jenna Ortega to the boys' house on Halloween night. So there were 2 or 3 blocks of these houses. And what would that have been? June, I think, when that started? The actor
May or
strike
June,
started.
yeah.
And they were totally decorated for Halloween, and they were all prepared to shoot that. And then they didn't. They shut down production. And this is what kind of made the strike really real for me, is kind of thinking through those ramifications of how, like, they were ready to go, but then the actors weren't going to show up. I believe they got on planes and left Massachusetts. And then the set deck crew came back and emptied that all out. And then really, truly, the week the strike ended and everything opened back up, they came back and they redecorated all the houses and got everything all set to do these scenes here in town. That day I didn't have my dog yet, so I was just a weirdo going for a walk, and I just they had certain streets blocked off. So the street the actual boy's house was on was blocked off, and the street above that, which is where Jenna Ortega takes a turn on the bike and there's a truck backing out, that street was also blocked off. But I went 1 block over from there and I walked up over a hill, and there were a whole bunch of looky-loos there with their morning coffee, so I could blend in and just check out. So I saw like the stunt bicycles. They had a bunch of bicycles ready to go. I saw the actual, folding director chair that said Jenna Ortega on it. And look, I'm a simple guy who spends a lot of time in his basement talking about movies. I thought this was awesome, and that makes 3 movies I've technically been on set for, and this was by far the worst of the 3, but still quite a thrill, and was fun to see it. And I was surprised going for a walk over in that neighborhood the other night, wanting to take a whole bunch of pictures, but there was a guy grilling outside the house that was the murder house, and I thought it was rude to just show up and take a bunch of pictures of him grilling. But they actually did the actual geography of the neighborhood looks like that. Despite her starting that bike ride in northern Vermont at the house they built and left up during the duration of the strike that got totally ransacked and vandalized because they left that house up for 6 months. And then she goes down over the covered bridge, and then it turns into my town many, many miles away. So it was a thrill. It was really fun. It's just hard to compete with Social Network for best movie I've ever visited the set of.
Well, what's the third one?
The third is when I had my lunch break at my former college, and I walked down to Popeye's Chicken and Biscuits like a hero that I am, and thought the world was ending because I saw hundreds of police, and I was like, "What is happening? Oh my God, what is happening? There's a crisis." And it was they were all in line getting food, and I was like, "Well, but why are they all in SWAT gear getting food?" Only to then piece together that it was Ben Affleck's The Town filming at Fenway Park, and the McDonald's where Jeremy Renner dies is actually gone now, but it was right there in that neighborhood. So that's the third, and I would put The Town ahead of this, even though that's not a perfect movie either.
That's fair. I would too. I will just say the connection of this is also my hometown and where my parents still live. So I was living through Greg's stories about this set, but the Social Network connection is that the building Jen and I both teach in is also a filming location for the Social Network.
Oh, I don't think I knew that.
It's where Zuckerberg first meets the twins, is in the lobby of GFS, and they film it like. They make it look like a lot bigger than it is because they like film it with both of them. Like whenever they cut shot, reverse shot, their backs are both onto the GFS lobby. So it looks like it's twice as big as it actually is. Like they're in the middle of this, but they're always at the edge of it.
There's nothing about that building that seems like it would make a good movie set. So like,
it's the stairs and the big windows, I think, is what they wanted. And the the well benches or well seats that are there.
Okay. Wow, I'll have to go back and rewatch that movie just looking out for that.
The one time he goes to class at Harvard is in Taper.
Oh.
Yeah. Anyway.
Okay.
Can't film at Harvard. They don't let you do it.
I mean, this would have been before we were there. Or this would have been before I was there.
Correct. Right? I was there. Yeah. I wasn't like, so I wasn't on set like when they were filming it. I think they filmed it over the summer. But I'm just noting that Greg was on set and we walk through where the set was to go to work when we go to work.
Let's do a quick Oscars watch. Okay, so the original movie only got one nomination, but it also won Best Makeup. So is it safe to say that something like that could happen with this one? I don't know. I feel like production design is possible.
Yeah, it could get none very easily. It could also get 2 or 3, like makeup, production design, costume design, maybe visual effects if they want to like put all that like practical stuff and reward that beyond makeup. But yeah, I mean, some of those tech awards, I don't think anything beyond that, but it could get that like be in that like Napoleon slot of like, suddenly it's like, it has 3 nominations. Like what? I don't know if it would win, especially as Jen, you love to point out, makeup being so tied in with lead acting wins in the last decade plus. But
you mean Michael Keaton's not getting a nomination for reprising his role as Beetlejuice? Like,
I mean, it would be funny. It would be interesting because theoretically that would have to be a supporting actor nomination. I know because he's top billed,
that's true.
They might put him in lead and then deal with the wrath of it. But it would be supporting. What would that do with your correlation theory?
We've already taken this too far. I was just kidding.
I would say Catherine O'Hara should be nominated before Michael Keaton.
Oh, I would love that. That would be great.
But it wouldn't, unfortunately.
No, it won't. Yeah, I think that the only possibility is because the guilds that are behind the makeup category, hair and makeup category, and costume in particular, they have a history of it's more about the work in the movie. No one in those branches really cares about whether or not the movie was good. You know what I mean? Like, it's a square rectangle thing where it's like, if a movie is really good and has a lot of other nominations, it could very easily end up in one of those categories. But they usually have 1 or 2 nominees that people are like, oh, right, that movie. I guess it had good makeup. Like, even if critically it was not acclaimed at all. So I think I always point to Cruella as being a good example of this. I don't remember how many nominations it got, but it's like everyone was like, oh yeah, that movie. Okay. I guess it had good costumes. It had a good costume designer. So it's possible, but I wouldn't hold your breath. Especially but I guess like what else? How full are those categories so far? I mean, in general, people keep saying that today is this year is a very weak year. I don't know if that.
Yeah, I mean, Dune Part 2 is the presumed leader in all below the line.
Yeah.
Would this get in over Furiosa because this is a success and Furiosa was not?
Yeah.
Or
there's also Wicked.
Yeah, could maybe.
Wicked arguably checks the same fantasy box as Beetlejuice, but probably will make, I don't know, who knows? Depends on how good it is. I'm the only one on our show that is excited about that movie. So
Do you
There
know
was
who
another
wants to see
trailer.
that though? It's the Beetlejuice crowd. My crowd was amped for that trailer,
Oh,
and
that's
they
right.
were like clapping hands, squealing in their seats. I was like, this and Joker. I mean, I think I texted you about Joker too. I was like, this is who these movies are for. Like, we found the overlapping demos that got us there. The goth dudes are really into Joker Part 2, and the goth ladies are really into Wicked. So, yeah, I was just gonna say, whatever it pulls in any of these categories, it's losing to Dune. So I'm not really adding to the conversation, but I was just gonna note that it could happen. I had a half a thought towards score, but I think anything good in the score is actually from the original movie, right? I think.
And Greg, to close off our episode of disappointing you about people's personal lives, look up the recent history of Danny Elfman and see if they're going to give him an Oscar nomination.
Too. Guys, what are we doing? Is there anybody? Is there any good people in Hollywood left?
Michael Keaton is by all accounts an upstanding individual.
He's still good.
Who's supposed to be a good man. You can support him. But yeah, I don't think Danny Elfman's getting an Academy Award nomination anytime soon. It's tough.
That one I actually didn't know. I'm gonna have to go look that up and be sad later.
Yeah, he'll still sell out the Hollywood
'Cause
Bowl
I
on Halloween, but he won't get an Oscar nomination. It's been tough.
I just watched Nightmare Before Christmas with my kids this weekend, and I was like, the music in this is incredible.
Maybe someday we can do, if we're.
It was always good too. His score for that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he's got incredible scores. He does the Simpsons theme. I listen to it all the time. Someday maybe we have to dig into the art. We do dig into the art versus artist. Maybe that won't be an episode. Maybe that's just our lives.
We can still like.
But I think I think you can enjoy some of these earlier things and just be like, okay, that's unfortunate, but this is good in and of itself. But anyway, he's not going to get a nomination, unfortunately. I mean, also, I don't think his score was anything. There wasn't much new beyond recycling the old themes, which I thought he did really well. But I don't recall anything new that like blew me away.
Yeah, I think I definitely remember the soundtrack, like the needle drops, more than I would the score for this one. I think
I feel like
it's a really interesting mix.
Yeah, I feel like in a any sort of retrospective, or if it was, if we ever did Oscar Fairy flashback going back to the late 80s, early 90s, like it's very strange that Danny Elfman was not honored around that time. I think he was just thought of as like this weird pop guy who did these scores that like who cared, but they really stood the test of time in a way that Danny Elfman's personal life has not.
Oh. Well, on that note, let's wrap things up. Greg, where can folks find you on the internet?
People can find me Googling a whole bunch of disappointing stories on the internet, and maybe following more tabloid accounts is what I'm learning from this episode. No, as always, this was a really fun discussion, and I have enjoyed the last two episodes being kind of more on the outside, but still enjoying the conversation and the discussion. So people can find me anywhere online at Ion Cannon, EYEONCANON. I gave this podcast a big plug on my Wheel of Time podcast this week, so I will reverse the trend and say that if people are interested in experiencing Wheel of Time, which is a fantasy book series, I host a podcast that's reading through the whole series. All the episodes are available starting from book 1, chapter 1, and you could give it a try. There is a third season of the Amazon television show readily being edited right now. So there are, screen versions that you can, and we have episodes about that. It's called Through the Glass Columns, available wherever you get fine podcasts. PT, where can people find you?
Well, when I'm not being the living embodiment of that Onion article about man gets little thrill every time he brings up John Lennon's abuse history, then you can find me on Letterboxd at PT McNiff, PTMCNIFF. You can also follow the show there at LTR Pod, or search the hashtag LTR Pod to see all of our individual reviews, the things that we have been watching, the little comments we make about the things we have been watching. If you also want to follow the show on Instagram and Threads, you can follow us there. At The Long Take Review would be the account name. You can email us, thelongtakereview@gmail.com, or you can subscribe and leave a review, leave a rating wherever you get your podcasts, wherever you're listening right now. Why don't you just subscribe to the show? Jen, where can folks find you?
You can find me on Instagram and Threads at Sopchockchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI, and on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jen. And if you've made it this far, we'll save you the trouble. The Long Take Review, the Long Take Review, the Long Take Review. We'll go back to the model. Thanks for listening. You can follow The Long Take Review on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive new podcast episodes as well as written reviews of films with Oscar buzz and new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.